By 1900, the Vanderbilt family controlled more than 100 mansions, an empire so vast it eclipsed the private holdings of European royalty. Fueled by a $100 million inheritance worth up to $250 billion today, America's richest dynasty built palaces everywhere, often left empty, each more extravagant than the last. But how did the sheer pursuit of unmatched luxury plant the seeds of their downfall? The answer begins with a single fortune and a scale that rewrote history. No European monarch, no old world dynasty ever matched what the Vanderbilts accomplished in America. By the dawn of the 20th century, the family's private holdings stretched from Manhattan to the Atlantic coast, from the Hudson Valley to the hills of North Carolina. Their name was stamped on more than 100 grand residences, an empire of stone and marble that dwarfed even the most storied royal collections. The scale of this portfolio defies easy description. 10 separate mansions lined Fifth Avenue, transforming New York's most famous boulevard into a private corridor of aristocratic power. In Newport, Rhode Island, at least a dozen Vanderbilt cottages, each one a palace in all but name, stood within a few miles of each other. Country estates dotted the Hudson River, Long Island, and the far reaches of the Adirondacks. A single family, split into 5 main branches, managed to create a network of homes that spanned the eastern United States. Unlike the centralized palaces of Europe, the Vanderbilt residences multiplied with each generation. Every son, daughter, and cousin seemed to require a separate mansion for every season. City life demanded a townhouse or two. Summer required a Newport retreat. Fall and winter called for country lodges or hunting camps. The result was a kind of architectural arms race, not just within the family, but among their Gilded Age peers, as each new home sought to outshine the last in size and splendor. Counting these properties is a challenge even for historians. Some sources tally only the largest homes, those with dozens of rooms and sprawling grounds, while others include secondary estates, guest houses, and European villas. By the most conservative standards, the family exceeded 25 major palatial homes by 1900. More expansive counts, which include every significant property under Vanderbilt control, push well past 100. What is undeniable is the breadth of their reach. Multiple branches, each with its own portfolio, each determined to leave a mark on the American landscape. This was not the slow accumulation of centuries. In the space of just 2 generations, the Vanderbilts achieved a level of private property ownership that stunned even the old money elite. Fifth Avenue's transformation into a Vanderbilt enclave was only the most visible sign of this ambition. In Newport, their summer cottages became the epicenter of high society, while in the countryside, entire villages seemed to orbit around the family's estates. The numbers alone, 10 mansions in Manhattan, a dozen in Newport, dozens more scattered across the country, set a new benchmark for American excess. Yet behind the numbers lies a deeper story. 5 family branches, each acting almost as a dynasty in its own right, each determined to build, acquire, and outlast the others. The result was an unprecedented sprawl of luxury, an empire of mansions that no king or queen could rival. The question remains, what kind of fortune could sustain such a scale? And how did this relentless pursuit of grandeur set the stage for the family's eventual unraveling? Cornelius Vanderbilt's death in 1877 set in motion one of the most dramatic wealth transfers in American history. His estate, valued at more than $100 million, stood as the largest personal fortune ever recorded in the United States up to that point. Vanderbilt's money had been built on the backbone of steamships and railroads, industries that connected distant cities and redefined the pace of American life. By the time of his passing, his business empire touched nearly every corner of the country, and his financial reach was felt in every major market. To understand the magnitude of this fortune, consider what $100 million meant in the late 19th century. Adjusted for modern standards, economists estimate that sum would equal somewhere between $200 billion and $250 billion today, depending on the method of calculation. That's a scale of wealth that rivals the richest individuals of the 21st century, more than the net worth of many tech titans, and far beyond most royal families. At the time, Vanderbilt's estate represented about $1 out of every $100 circulating in the entire U.S. economy. The will itself was as direct as the man who wrote it. The vast majority of the fortune passed to his eldest son, William Henry Vanderbilt, who took control of the railroads and doubled the family's holdings within a decade. But the real story begins with the next generation. Upon William Henry's death in 1885, his own estate, now swollen to nearly $200 million, was divided among his 8 children. Each heir received a sum that, even by today's standards, would be enough to purchase skyscrapers, islands, or entire neighborhoods. This division of wealth fueled a new kind of rivalry, not just with outsiders, but within the family itself. Siblings and cousins, each armed with a personal fortune, set out to make their mark. Some favored the city, some the seaside, others the countryside. Freed from the need to manage a business empire, they turned their attention to building monuments to their own names. The result was a burst of construction that reshaped the country's most exclusive neighborhoods and created a new standard for American luxury. The financial firepower behind this spree was almost impossible to exhaust. While other families built a single grand home to anchor their legacy, the Vanderbilts built dozens, sometimes simultaneously. Architects and craftsmen from across the Atlantic were summoned to New York and Newport, their talents bankrolled by checks that never bounced. The family's appetite for marble, gold, and rare woods seemed limitless. Each new mansion was a declaration. The Vanderbilt name would not just endure, it would dominate. Yet the seeds of future problems were already present. With the fortune split among so many heirs and each branch determined to outshine the others, the stage was set for an escalation in spending that even the Commodore himself might have found reckless. The money flowed easily, and so did the ambition. The next chapter in the family's story would not be about earning wealth, but about displaying it on a scale the country had never seen. Fifth Avenue. In the late 19th century was more than a street. It became a family stronghold. William Henry Vanderbilt, flush with the proceeds of a fortune that seemed inexhaustible, set his sights on a stretch of Manhattan that would become the city's most coveted address. Between 1882 and 1885, construction crews worked day and night at 640 Fifth Avenue, erecting 3 massive brownstone mansions side by side. These weren't just homes, they were monuments, the so-called Triple Palace, built for William Henry, his wife, and his 2 daughters. The 3 houses could be opened up into a single ballroom, large enough to host hundreds, or closed off for private affairs. The effect was deliberate, a display of unity and power that signaled the Vanderbilts had arrived at the very center of American society. The family's grip on Fifth Avenue tightened as the years passed. By 1890, Vanderbilt addresses stretched across 4 city blocks, from 51st to 57th Street. Each new mansion brought a new architectural statement, each facade a challenge to rivals and relatives alike. The Cornelius Vanderbilt Sin House at 1 West 57th Street, completed in 1883, stood as the largest private residence ever built in Manhattan. Its footprint dwarfed even the grand embassies of Europe, with a ballroom that could swallow the entire main floor of the British consulate. The house rose 5 stories above the avenue, its windows framed in carved limestone, its interiors a riot of marble, gold leaf, and hand-carved wood. The press called it a palace. Guests whispered that it seemed more like a royal court transplanted to the New World. Elsewhere along the avenue, the family's ambitions continued to multiply. George W. Vanderbilt commissioned the Marble Twins at 645 and 647 Fifth Avenue, a pair of French Renaissance Revival mansions that gleamed in the afternoon sun. The block between 51st and 54th became a kind of private compound, with cousins and siblings living within shouting distance, their homes connected by marble steps and private gardens. For a time, it seemed as if the Vanderbilts had managed to carve out a kingdom in the heart of Manhattan, a place where every corner, every doorway bore their name. The sheer density of Vanderbilt homes on Fifth Avenue set them apart from every other American dynasty. No other family controlled so much of Manhattan's prime real estate. The Astors and the Morgans had their mansions, but only the Vanderbilts could claim entire blocks. Their architects borrowed from the Chateaux of France, the Palazzi of Italy, and the great houses of England, but always with an eye toward outdoing the originals. The effect was unmistakable. Fifth Avenue became not just the city's wealthiest street, but its most exclusive enclave, a showcase for American ambition on a scale that left even seasoned European visitors astonished. By the turn of the century, this corridor of stone and marble stood as the clearest symbol of the family's vision. The city itself seemed to bend around their presence. For the Vanderbilts, Fifth Avenue was more than an address. It was a statement of intent, a declaration that their name belonged not just to the world of commerce, but to the world of kings. Newport, Rhode Island, became the summer battleground for the Vanderbilt family's pursuit of prestige. Here, the term cottage lost all meaning. Marble House, commissioned by Alva Vanderbilt and completed in 1892, was a palace in disguise. 50 rooms built almost entirely from imported stone, its gold-leafed ballroom designed for gatherings that rivaled European courts. But Marble House was only the beginning. Within a few years, Newport's coastline glittered with more than 10 Vanderbilt mansions, each one determined to outdo the last. The Breakers, finished in 1895 for Cornelius Vanderbilt II, stood at the center of this arms race. With nearly 70 rooms and 138,000 square feet. It was larger than most royal residences, yet it functioned as a stage set for just 8 to 10 weeks each summer. For the rest of the year, the Breakers sat empty, its marble halls patrolled by a skeleton staff, its gardens tended in silence. The pattern repeated itself across the family's branches. Every season demanded a different address. a city mansion for winter, a Newport palace for the high summer social calendar, and a country lodge for autumn hunting or spring retreats. In some years, the family's properties in Newport alone could host simultaneous balls, each with its own orchestra and guest list. Duplication was relentless. Multiple homes, each built to announce not just wealth, but the ability to leave entire palaces idle for most of the year. By 1900, the average Vanderbilt mansion spent over 70% of the year unoccupied, maintained solely as a symbol of readiness for the next Aal season. No property better captured this escalation than Biltmore, the rural outlier that dwarfed every rival. George Washington, Vanderbilt II, broke from the coastal circuit and built his estate in the hills outside Asheville, North Carolina. Completed in 1895, Biltmore stretched to more than 178,000 square feet, with 250 rooms, a vast library, and a banquet hall that could seat an army. The grounds included managed forests, working farms, and miles of private roads. Biltmore wasn't just a mansion, it was a private kingdom, conceived as both refuge and monument. Yet even this showpiece remained mostly empty, its owner often traveling or residing elsewhere, while a permanent staff kept the estate in readiness for rare visits. The sheer scale of duplication set the Vanderbilts apart from every other American dynasty. Their homes were not simply places to live, but trophies in a contest where absence itself became a mark of status. The cost of keeping dozens of palaces pristine, many of them unused for months at a time, was almost invisible to outsiders. But behind the closed doors and shuttered windows, an expensive reality began to take hold. The next chapter will reveal the true price of owning too much beauty, as the burden of maintenance and staff began to outpace even the grandest fortunes. The grandeur of the Vanderbilt mansions came with a price that few outsiders ever saw. Each estate operated like a small business, demanding a permanent staff, chefs, butlers, maids, gardeners, chauffeurs, and security, just to keep the doors open and the lights on. At the breakers alone, payroll records from the early 1900s list more than 45 full-time employees, with additional seasonal staff swelling the ranks during high society's brief summer invasion. The annual operating cost for a single flagship mansion could reach $3 million in today's dollars, covering not only wages, but also utilities, repairs, and endless upkeep. Marble roofs leaked, gold leaf faded, and imported marble cracked in the winter cold, each problem requiring immediate and costly attention. Multiply these expenses across dozens of properties, each one demanding constant care, even while sitting empty most of the year, and the numbers ballooned to staggering heights. By the 1920s, the combined maintenance bill for the family's real estate empire hovered around $150 million a year in modern terms. For some branches, staff wages alone began to eat up a quarter or more of their annual income. The invisible machinery of luxury, coal deliveries, linen service, fresh flowers, and round-the-clock security became a relentless drain, quietly eroding the fortunes that had once seemed limitless. As the bills mounted, the question shifted from how many mansions could be built to how many could actually be sustained. In 1913, the introduction of the federal income tax landed like a thunderclap across America's wealthiest families. For the Vanderbilts, accustomed to untaxed railroad profits and investment income, the new top rate, just 7% at first, was enough to begin unraveling their financial advantage. Suddenly, every dollar spent on coal, repairs, or staff for dozens of mansions had to be earned and reported, with the government taking a share. The burden grew as estate taxes followed, slicing further into inherited wealth with each passing generation. Tragedy and misfortune struck in quick succession. Alfred G. Vanderbilt, a key figure in the family's next chapter, drowned in 1915 when the Lusitania was torpedoed off the Irish coast. 5 years later, William Kissam Vanderbilt died, leaving a tangle of estates and a shrinking pool of capital. With each death, properties changed hands, often falling to heirs with neither the means nor the will to maintain them. The Great Depression then swept through in 1929, cutting property values by as much as 20% and drying up the income streams that kept the lights burning in marble halls. Demolition permits began to outnumber party invitations. Between 1925 and 1947, a wave of destruction erased nearly every Vanderbilt mansion along Fifth Avenue. Marble House and the Breakers survived by becoming museums. Others were sold off, repurposed, or simply razed for new development. By the time the dust settled, only about 7% of the family's once vast portfolio remained standing in any recognizable form. The greatest private real estate empire in American history had collapsed under its own weight, leaving behind empty lots, public museums, and a cautionary tale about the limits of luxury. The ruins and museums left behind remind us excess on this scale isn't just history, it's a warning. Today, luxury real estate still fuels headlines and fortunes, but the lesson stands. No fortune, however vast, remains immune to the weight of its own ambition. The line between legacy and liability is never as wide as the walls that try to hold it.